just 8 o'clock. And we'll start by moving to the, let's see, where are we? Here's my new script, which is a little different than what we normally have, considering that this is our first meeting in person in almost 3 years. So I'll ask for the public to be patient with us as we're learning or relearning some skills that we've lost over the last 3 years. We also have a boardroom that's configured a little bit differently and also allows for participation from people dialing in from the outside via Zoom call as well as in person. So we are going to be learning a little bit as we go along, and so I'll ask for your patience. So this meeting is actually being held in person, and the link and the telephone option provided is for the convenience of the public, and you can find that online on our agenda. With regard to folks that are on the call virtually, and for those members on the panel up here, the directors, in order to reduce feedback, I'm going to ask you could mute your microphones when you're not speaking. And with that, we'll call the meeting to order. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have an electronic device here in the room, if you would please silence it, and that will also reduce feedback during the meeting. So we'll call on directors in roll call order for discussion as in the following order: Director Gracia, Director Bloomer, Secretary Treasurer McKenna, Vice President Bowman, and then President Ortega. And all votes will be conducted via roll call order as well. And with that, I'd like to ask Vice President Bowman if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. I would be glad to. Right hand on your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask Assistant Secretary Baca to conduct the roll call.
Director Gracia? Here. Director Bloomer?
Present.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Here.
Vice President Bowman?
Here?
And President Ortega?
Present.
All present, thank you.
Thank you. So now we can move to item number 2 on the agenda, public comment on items not on the agenda. And so this is a time for members of the public, either in the boardroom with us today or attending virtually, who may have some comment they'd like to make about business that has to do with the water agency but is not on today's agenda. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And with that, I'm looking on our virtual screen. I see no hands raised. And I'll ask Assistant Secretary Baca if she's received or we've received any email messages regarding public comment.
No emails have been received.
Thank you. Seeing no public comment for items not on the agenda, we can move to the next item, which is item number 4 for public comment for items listed on the agenda. And again, if there's a member of the public who's attending virtually or in the room who would like to speak at this time about an item on the agenda, you can step forward to the podium, and we'd ask you to keep your comments to less than 3 minutes, or you can raise your hand via the Zoom call. And we also, at the same time, we have several items on our agenda for later action items, and there will be an opportunity for public comment at that time as well. So seeing none, I think we can move to the next item, which is item number 5, consent calendar items. I'll ask my fellow directors whether any of them have items that they want pulled from the consent calendar, and then we can discuss those separately. Otherwise, I'll be looking for a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar of items 5A through 5E, and then we can move on to the next item. Are there any items that we'd like to have pulled?
Just for the fun of it, let's pull item E. Just to item E, which
Yep.
is water use.
Sure, we can do that. So we can actually, I guess we can discuss that now. And I believe that would be Mrs. Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. It's an honor to be here before you today, back in person. Ashley Metzger with Regional Government Services Authority. So before you, you have the January 2023 water use reduction figures. We're trending quite well when compared to the same number of meters back in 2013. We elected to keep this as the baseline year for the purposes of our comparison because it was the period before the last drought, and we've had a lot of volatility since that time. One thing worth noting is that we have had some anomalies with regard to our production metering. So our billed usage from customers, those figures are all normal and all within what we would expect. However, when we're looking at the meters from our sources, so from our wells and our streams, we did see a little bit of an anomaly in January. So we are working on that. One of the meters was pulled for calibration and testing from our well site. So we have that going on. We also have, during the month of March, a source meter calibration study. So we are working with a consultant, eSource, to go to various well sites and diversions to make sure that the metering configuration is appropriate after years. You know, the meter configuration may have been set up properly, but over time the meters were changed out and perhaps things have changed. And we just want to make sure we have a really good handle on production reporting. It's something that the state now requires us to submit to them on a monthly basis. So we really want to ensure that we feel good about those numbers. So this study should give us that extra layer of confidence, and it will also put us into a program where we, for each of our meters, have a set time for when we pull them to calibrate them. So that's going to really improve our data validity, or the confidence that we have in our data, for both our monthly figures like what you see here, and also for our water loss report that we submit each year. However, just another couple highlights is we are looking at about a 22.5% savings over the past 12 months, which is quite good. And we are actually doing quite a good job, even when you compare us to the governor's request over 2020. You know, one of the reasons we don't use the state's baseline is because 2020, as everyone in this room knows, was a very strange year for everyone, but particularly in tourist communities like the Coachella Valley. So using that as a baseline year didn't really give us the data we were looking for. So that's why you see the 2013 reflected. And on the next page, you'll also see the water waste reporting figures. So I do like to share that the number of violations at 36 might seem quite high compared to the number of follow-up actions. It's worth noting that we oftentimes get reports for other agencies, sometimes CVWD, sometimes Mission Springs. We also get reports that DWA follows up on itself. So for example, if someone reports a leak in the middle of the street, that would appear in that 36 number, but we wouldn't do any customer follow-up because we are directly following up with the problem. So that's just a quick highlight. Happy to answer any questions you may have about the report.
Thank you. Director Gracia, do you have some questions?
Does this normally appear in the consent calendar, or was this something that used to appear separately? I'm just curious about that.
Since we began doing the consent calendar, this item has always appeared in the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, any other questions?
I'm just curious, when we do cite somebody for wasting water, what is the level of penalty that we have for that? And does it escalate?
Yes, sir. So a first citation for a single-family resident is $50, and then it escalates to $100 and $250 for each subsequent fine. And for commercial or HOA, anything large scale, it starts out at $100 it goes up to $200, and the third charge is $500, and any subsequent fine is also at that $500 level. We are also, if we have continuous noncompliance, we do have the authority to shut off water service. However, that's not something that we've exercised. We've always really had a great ability with the penalties and the incentives to get people on the right track. And it's worth noting that the first citations, we treat like a fix-it ticket. So if someone demonstrates proof of repair, we do waive those citations.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? So, at this point, I'm gonna ask from council some advice. Are we able to now accept a motion to accept the entire consent calendar, or do we have to treat this one item separately?
Unless someone wants it pulled and treated separately, I think you can take a single motion on all items A through E.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be looking for a motion to accept the consent calendar as presented.
Move item 5, the staff's recommendation.
Thank you. I have a first, and could I have a second?
Second that?
Okay, I have a second. A first from Director Gracia, a second from Secretary Treasurer McKenna. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Yes.
Director Bloomer,
Yes.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Yes.
Vice President Bowman,
Yes.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Right, so now we can move on to action items. Number 6, we'll start with A, and I believe that staff report was prepared by our Assistant General Manager, Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. The action item before you this morning is a customer appeal from David and Luba Silver, who are present today in the audience. As allowed per agency resolution 1224, Mr. and Mrs. Silver are appealing their January 2023 water bill in the amount of $1,498.77. They contend that they are not liable for an outstanding water bill that was left behind by a tenant that occupied the property that they own in Palm Springs. And attached to the staff report is the official appeal that was submitted by Mr. and Mrs. Silver on January 13th. I have also attached a copy of staff summary of the events leading up to the appeal. And at this time, I'd like to go over the summary if the board would like that.
I would, yes.
Sure. Okay. So attachment 2 is a summary of the events leading up to the appeal. As I said, Mr. and Mrs. Silver owned a property in Palm Springs that was occupied by a tenant. It was placed, according to our records, in the tenant's name back in November of 2016. During the governor's COVID-19 restrictions, the tenant stopped making payments on their water bill, and that continued for 17 months, accounting to around $1,600 in unpassed water bills. Now, normally we would have sent out a letter for non-payment, but because of the restrictions, we were not allowed to do that. And that letter would have went back out in July of 2021 when the bill was $124.17. So when restriction or late fees were reinstated, we placed the account on a avoid late fee policy, which basically said, hey, if the customer continues to pay a late fee and keeps up with the late fee amounts, they would not be required to just pay a total lump sum amount. And we put that in place so that when these type of accounts were put back into late fee category, they weren't required to just pay this a large amount up front. And then when restrictions were lifted in mid-2022, our billing policy had an error in the programming, and it didn't identify that this property was behind. And so it wasn't flagged, and therefore late notices weren't sent out to the property at that time to the tenant. And that, again, that was it should have happened in September 2022. In November of 2022, Mrs. Silver called the agency. I believe at that time the tenant had moved out, and she called and had questions about the non-payment. And she spoke with our customer's field supervisor, Garrett Nelson. He informed her of the situation regarding the restrictions placed on the agency during COVID. And he also informed her that the property is subject to disconnection at that time. And also per Agency Ordinance 70, the property owner is fully responsible for any past due charges for water services to that property. Then in that same month, we corrected our programming error. We sent out a disconnection automated call in December, advising that the property was subject to disconnection. Because of the holidays, we place all of shut-offs on hold during the Christmas holidays. So in January, a final notice was then sent to the property, and we also placed a notice on the front door. Mrs. Silver found the notification the following day, contacted the agency again regarding this notification, and again she was advised that the property owner is responsible to avoid disconnection. Mrs. Silver then submitted a written dispute on January 6th. Staff reviewed the account, and on January 9th made a determination that the property owner is responsible for past due amounts per Ordinance 70. However, staff did remove 4 late fee charges totaling $100 as a result of that delay that occurred from September to November. And then on January 13th, Mrs. Silver filed an official appeal to the board. Staff has reversed a $25 late fee that was assessed in February of this year. Therefore, the current amount due for past due charges is $1,498.77. Also, I'll note that in March of 2022, the account did qualify and received a COVID-19 credit from the Riverside County for $65.85. So as far as fiscal impacts, if the board denies the appeal, there will be no impact. However, if the board decides to grant the appeal, the agency may credit the account as determined by the board's direction. And at this time, staff recommends that the board of directors deny the appeal, as Ordinance 70 does indicate that the property owner is responsible for all charges at a property for water services. And staff also recommends that the customer enroll in a payment plan up to 12 months for the past due amount of $1,498.77. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. So at this time, I believe the Silvers are in the room. So if they'd like to step forward. Tell us a little bit about where you sit on this and your as far as the appeal is concerned.
The biggest questions I have right now, it was the one from the beginning. How come nobody notified us about any bills? Because the tenants stopped paying in July of 21st, and the bill ballooned to already in March 22 to like $700. No red flag to call us. You have my email, my phone number. We have 2 accounts with Desert Water. I understand that I signed the paper that I am responsible, and I am responsible person, but if I don't know anything and nobody tells me anything, how I supposed to take care of business? And my question is, how can we allow to this amount to balloon like that in almost 20 months? Because she stopped paying in 21, and yeah, and we up to $1,600. So that's the big question. And I never got the answer why we were not notified. Because, you know, so soon she accumulated $200, don't you have like a red flag? She's not paying. Now we go to 700, nothing is happening. And we have 2 accounts with Desert Water from 2017, and we're with you guys from 2004. I know that I signed the paper, I always pay my bills, but nobody said nothing about the notification. The only advice I got, use your deposit. But this is besides the point. You know. So that's the big questions. If I was notified, I will take care of business. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
thank
So,
you.
if you don't mind staying at the podium, because we're going to have, I'm sure the directors will have some questions both for staff and for you. So if we can, we'll start with Director Grasha.
My God, I am not used to it.
It's okay. Most of us aren't used to it either. It's all right. We'll start with Director Grasha if he has some questions for you and for staff.
Welcome and congratulations. You're the first people from Division I to come before this board since the 1960s, and
Oh my
I'm
God.
honored to be
What is
your-
Division One?
When they shifted away from elections by division back in the 60s, and they reinstated those, so this is a brand-new opportunity. I wanted to ask staff, how many accounts would you say in the district fall into the category of potentially coming to this podium? Do we have a few dozen that have kind of fallen behind like this, or is it more than that?
I'll defer to Director Sines on that.
So when it comes to our delinquent accounts, we had, I believe, in the realm of 30 that caught up in this programming error that we would potentially be seeing something like this out to 23,000. So our payment program was not designed for individuals to go past due on the payment program itself, but due to the COVID restrictions, we found ourselves in that place, and then of course discovered after the fact that we had this error where they weren't getting notified when the disconnections were reinstated. So we have about 30 that we've worked through, a majority of them, and now we just have a couple. And one we've already made our way through that we've already been seen by this board, and this is the only other one that I know that I have been made aware of at this point in time.
Tell me how the funds that the agency received from the governor's what was it, emergency funding, the
It
arrearage
was
program?
the
How are those
California arrearage.
applied, and would this have not fallen into a position of being able to benefit from that?
They did benefit from it. So they received a payment of approximately $60 for what did qualify for, but that ended on June 15th, 2021 was the end of that eligibility period. So only amounts that were still outstanding in January 2022 from that period were eligible to receive payment, of which this account did receive approximately $60.
And it's the agency's policy, as with other districts as well, that tenants are held to pay for the water they use, but ultimately that responsibility, when they don't pay, goes to the homeowner, because the homeowner sticks around after the tenant splits town. Otherwise, the tenant should be standing there, and for that, we apologize. But if it wasn't handled that way, because I'm not sure I fully agree with it, but I do fully agree that the agency has to stay solid financially. And when in an area like this where so many people are renters, I think in my division and in Desert Hot Springs area, although served retail by a different agency, it's about 60% renters. So that turnover is just impossible to keep up with. So I think that when the board is done, I would move that we follow staff's recommendation and uphold the appeal.
Yeah, it's actually not showing up on my
Oh, I didn't hear
list.
you. There we go.
There we go. It's still not showing up, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to open the floodgate to, a whole lot of people just getting their bills waived. I have a lot of sympathy for the customer, but this is an obligation imposed by statute. You are required to pay. It's not like a light bill or a natural gas bill. You have to pay the water bill, the sewer, the trash, and so on. I was a little troubled by bullet point number 5, if you scroll back to, it says, once the restrictions were lifted, the agency's billing program should have flagged the account for shut-off. And so I think we may have failed the customer here a little bit. Were they eligible for some kind of relief on this account at that point, and were not able to claim it, or what happened then?
So the relief and that programming error are not related, and they did not impact their eligibility to receive that. What that programming error did is it delayed the notification for shut-off for a few months. So beginning in September of 2021, we reinstated the discontinuation of service for non-payment, and that began our SB 998 protocols for notifying customers of their delinquent status. So they should have received a notice in September 2021, which would have kicked off the discontinuation process. That process takes approximately 30 days. So the first time that we would have been requiring payment would have been in October of 2021, but the error was discovered in November. So we reversed the late fees associated with that delay of our programming error to get that disconnection notice. So, but the eligibility for relief funding is unrelated, and they did receive what they were owed.
Do we know what the bill was in mid-22?
Yeah, it appears on September 1st of 2022, it was $1,330.
I see. All right, it's not a big difference, but I'm kind of minded to say perhaps we should limit the customer's responsibility to that number as an option. I'll put that to later, but that's what I'm minded to say at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bloomer, do you have some questions?
I don't have any questions, just a comment that I think this happens with a lot of property owners and their tenants. That's why property owners choose to just keep it in their name so they're fully notified and take care of that. I don't know if there's a way for us to set up notification to, say, the property owner and the tenant when there's a late bill, or for the, maybe the property owner to receive a copy of the bill, perhaps?
At this point in time, we do not have that capability
Maybe with our new
programmatically.
system.
We are in the midst of implementing a new billing system where we will have the capabilities for that. We do have the capability, however, for them to log into an online portal to be able to view the outstanding bills, but it will not trigger a mailing of an additional bill to you. However, this account, it was always in the Silver's name. It was never technically put into the tenant's name. At the directions of the Silvers, it was forwarded, the bill was forwarded to the property address in care of the tenant and tenants' names, and had been done so in with prior tenants as well. So this was a normal operating procedure for this account, where the tenant was receiving the bill at the property to take care of. But it is at the election of the property owner where they would like that bill to go to. If they would like it to continue to go to them so they are fully aware and notified, they have the option to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Vice President Bowman?
First of all, thank you for coming up.
Thank you.
Water District is owned by all of us, ratepayers, and so we're all in this together. When did your tenant leave your property?
November 20th.
Of last year?
Yes.
Okay. When did you first learn of the delinquency?
On November 21st, because I called the water company to put the account back on my name, and then I got the big shock. They told me it was at that time $1,600, and I couldn't understand how this has happened. So that's what was November 21st.
So you learned about this delinquency at that very point?
When I was trying to, the tenant moved out. Next day, I called all the utilities and told them to put account back in our name.
Okay.
And this is how I got the information.
I think we have an opportunity as a district to figure out how to prevent this in the future, for sure. Notification, awareness is key. I think I appreciate what Mrs. Silver said. If I was notified, I would have taken care of business. I hope that we can have staff look into how we can make this possible to notify the actual homeowner. Meanwhile, the tenant was just, did they keep up with their rent?
I'm sorry?
Did they keep up with their rent to you?
No. With what?
Did they keep up with the rent?
Yes, yes.
So they kept their rent going, but they didn't pay their water bill? How about?
Correct.
How about any other utilities?
I have another outstanding bill for $200 with the trash company. Edison and gas, no idea. They are not chasing me, so I guess, no,
All right.
not sure.
I think that's all the questions I have right now.
Thank you. So I'll start with some questions for staff. I think Vice President Bowman and Director Bloomer answered some of my questions already. With the governor's order to not allow shut-off of water utilities during that period, I'm trying to remember, and maybe Director Sines can remind me whether what, if any, other utilities fell into that same category.
I do not recall of other utilities that fell into those categories.
So for the purpose
Just
of this
aware of
conversation, we're working on the assumption it was only water utilities that were prevented from shutting off service during that period.
Right, that is my working knowledge.
Okay, thank you. I'm challenged by this one. I'm very sympathetic to the situation. I'm also concerned about perhaps setting a precedent of, now, again, it sounds like, at least in this time, we may only have one other account possibly that could fall into this category or this situation. But I do understand, in terms of, back to your original question, Mrs. Silver, about why you weren't notified. And I don't think that has anything to do with this billing error that came up in September of 2022. It has to do with the fact that we weren't allowed to send out notifications of disconnect during this period, and that the bill, in any case, even though the account was still in the name of the Silvers and who are the property owners, but that the bill itself was going to the tenant, the care of the tenant, which is, I believe, what you said, so for all intents and purposes, outside of perhaps logging in via a portal, the homeowner, the property owners would not have had visibility to that situation. So I'm a little conflicted about how to go on this. And with that, unless there are any other questions, yes, sir.
A follow-up question. Would the notice of disconnect have gone to the Silvers?
No, the notice of disconnection would have not gone to the Silvers.
So they would have had no idea.
That is correct.
Right now, there is no way they would have known that this tenant was not paying his or her bill.
That is correct. The way that SB 998 makes the requirement of our notification is that we must notify the billing address, which is at the determination of the owner, where that bill is to be sent to. And then the protections are really in place for the tenant, is the focus of that legislation.
I understand that part. I'm just trying to figure out how they could have known that this was happening. And it appears to me that they would not have known.
That is
until
correct.
all of a sudden, the shock back in November.
But
Go ahead.
the water would have been turned off, so that bill would have been cleared quick, like, it's, people to pay their late water bills as soon as they can't get up and take a shower in the morning. So at whatever that was, that would have stopped the damage at that point, so that would have never had that effect. But that's how come we fall back on the governor's order. It says we can't send out disconnect notices, so,
Well,
sorry.
if the agency had put a padlock on that meter sometime
Right.
in, July or August of 2022, the tenant would still have been there.
Right, but I don't believe that could have been possible. We couldn't have shut off the water in July of 2022.
Correct.
Am I correct?
Normal circumstances.
Well, it says shut-off restrictions were lifted in mid-2022.
They were lifted in mid-22. The agency did not elect to reinstate them until much later. So
sorry, could you say it
September,
again?
the agency did not elect to reinstate the disconnections of service for non-payment until September of 2022. So there was a delay there at the agency's election because we were working on implementing and providing the COVID relief funding. So we did not want to turn anybody off that would be eligible for relief funding while we needed the administrative time to be able to do that. So we delayed that. So it would not have been turned off, and we did not send out notifications until beginning September 2022.
Right, and then at that point, later, we discovered that there was this glitch in our billing system that would not have even sent out that notification in September, which I believe you've addressed by removing the late fees.
Correct.
But the usage and fixed fees are still in place.
Correct.
Up till November 20th or whatever that was that the tenant moved out of the building.
Correct.
Okay. Unless there are any other questions, I'll look for a motion.
Move staff's recommendation, which is to deny the appeal, right?
I'll look for a second.
I'll second.
All right, I have a first from Director Gracia, a second from Director Bloomer. Assistant Secretary Baca, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Yes.
Director Bloomer,
Yes.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Yes.
Vice President Bowman.
I have a problem with this, and the problem is the Silvers did not know what was going on with their property. Now, we could say that it is their problem, that they should have been aware of following it, but we don't. That's between them and their tenant. I think this gives the district an opportunity to do better in notification, and I'm going to say no.
And President Ortega.
I'm going to abstain.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, so we can move to the next item. Thank you. Which is action item 6B, request board decision on customer appeal, Todd Elliott. And I believe that's Director Sines.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of the board. So we have another appeal before you, this one for Mr. Todd Elliott. The formal request in the appeal is the customer is disputing the agency's calculations for determining customer eligibility for relief payments provided by the California Water and Wastewater Arrearage Payment Program, administered by the California Water Resources Control Board. And within the staff report, I've listed statements of facts. So essentially the same thing that was provided in the attachment in the previous staff report. The first statement that the customer made was that the program guidelines indicate all monthly bills from March 2020 through June 2021 could be eligible. According to the program guidelines, an arrearage is an amount of money owed to a water system for non-payment of a residential and commercial account that accrued from completed billing periods during the pandemic relief period. The agency has determined eligibility based on any amounts that are still owed from completed billing periods between March 4th and June 15th. So the agency did follow those guidelines for completed billing periods within that time frame. The customer also claims that he did not receive $1,875.06 in relief payments under the program, with the potential for claiming additional amounts once he's received and reviewed his March 2020 through September 2020 billing history. Item number 3 indicates that he has since received that billing history information, so he did receive that. Back to item number 2. According to the program guidelines, an eligible amount is an arrearage or an amount of money owed to a water system which indicates the amount must still be owed or outstanding. The program does not provide for payment assistance for bills that are no longer owed. So in summary, since the customer's account was paid in full as of April 5th, 2021, any bills prior to that date are not eligible for a credit according to the program guidelines, as the bills were no longer owed. Additionally, the customer made subsequent payments to his account after the end of the eligibility period. And according to the program guidelines, at the point of the application of the relief payment, so at the point of time that the agency had the funds and actually applied it to the customer's accounts, the eligible delinquent amount must still be outstanding at that point in time. The customer's eligible balance of $61.56 was already paid in full by the time the funds were received and distributed to customers' accounts. And this is, you can see the detail of that on attachment 5. Moving on to item number 4, the customer provided the FAQs for the wastewater portion of the relief program as evidence of his claim that the agency did not calculate the eligible relief amounts appropriately, as the eligible billing periods should be any bills that include 6/15/2021. Even though the document provided by the customer was for the wastewater program, there was, and he is not a wastewater customer, there is a similar document for the water program. So we went and we reviewed those documents, and the agency utilized the water program guidelines adopted on September 21st, 2022. That was amended on December 7th, 2021, and January 19th, 2022. And the reason I put those in is that this was a kind of a fast-moving project with a lot of changes, which we were all trying to keep up with and do the best that we could in order to get customers the eligible relief that they could. The water program FAQ issued on October 8, 2021 did explain the eligibility periods to be inclusive of these dates rather than completed by June 15th, 2021, which was the original guidance that the agency was following when pulling the data. Due to the agency's billing system limitations requiring a substantial amount of staff time to restart the data pulls and compile the necessary data, staff continued to use the June 15th, 2021 as a cutoff date for completed billing periods as outlined in the program guidelines, and which was the data that was used to complete the survey of all water agencies which was the first step of eligibility in order to apply for the program. Agency staff also worked closely with the California Water Resources Control Board staff regarding the eligibility requirements to ensure that we were doing things appropriately in applying these payments. And they stressed that their primary concern when interpreting and applying the guidelines was to ensure consistency across all customers, understanding that the guidance was changing during the implementation process. In this instance, if the agency changed its methodology to include the June 15th, 2021 billing date, any bills that included that date rather than bills completed by that date, it would have increased the customer's eligibility to $455.24. However, after the end of the eligibility period and prior to the receipt of the application of the funding to customer accounts, the customer had made $317.88 worth of payments, which reduced the eligibility in this revised scenario down to $137.36. So in summary, if the agency was able to modify its approach to include the June 15th date, the customer would have been eligible to receive $137.36 in relief payments, and that is detailed in attachment 6. And I would like to point out that if you have a paper version of the one that was sent to you, it is a few cents difference. There was a minor typo which has been corrected from what is posted on the screen and what I'm reading off to you right now. For item number 5, staff has already waived $125 worth of late fees. Staff has provided the opportunity to enroll in a payment plan to avoid disconnection of water service and future late fees. Staff has provided the customer with information on the LIWAP program, which is administered by Riverside County, and the Help to Others program, which is administered by the United Way of the Desert, where the customer can apply for up to $2,200 in credits for these programs if eligibility requirements are met. Lastly, the program, the California Water and Wastewater Arrearage Payment Program, has now ended, which is not a program the agency was required to apply for to make assistance funding available to customers. I would like to point out that the agency did spend a considerable amount of staff time to apply for, attend trainings to how to administer and determine customer eligibility, and to communicate with customers and apply payments to eligible accounts, and completing the reporting requirements to the California Resources Control Board. The time spent administering the program far exceeded the 3% of the administrative costs that we're allowed to recoup under the program. And that concludes all of the statements of fact that the agency has in regards to this appeal. And the fiscal impact, if the board decides to deny the appeal, there would be no fiscal impact. If the board decides to grant the appeal, the impact would be $137.36. In staff's recommendation, based on the statements listed above, staff recommends that the board of directors grant the appeal in the revised amount of the calculated by the agency staff of $137.36 as a credit to the customer's account.
Thank you. Director Gracia?
I would move the staff's recommendation as just described by the finance director.
Thank you. I have a first, and may I have a second?
I'll make a second.
Thank you. Before we proceed to a vote, is there any further discussion? No? Seeing none, I'll ask Assistant Secretary Baca for a roll call vote, please.
Director Gracia,
Yes.
Director Bloomer,
Yes.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Yes.
Vice President Bowman,
Yes.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. So we can move to action item 6C, request approval of public events eligible for board compensation. Mrs. Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Before you, you have an updated list of public events eligible for compensation pursuant to the Public Events Compensation Policy approved at the last board meeting. The reason that this list is coming before you today is there was a verbal amendment to the list made at the last meeting, and staff was a little bit unclear about how to proceed. So we talked about, putting together the list as we interpreted it, and that's what you see before you today. And we just wanted to have the board review that list, ensure that it is in line with what you were expecting, and then go ahead and formally adopt this revised list. So with that, we recommend that the board adopt the list of public events presented before you today dated March 7th, 2023.
Thank you. Do we have, Director Gracia?
Thanks for bringing this back. I was, when this was talked about the first time, the Building Industry Association of Southern California has their monthly meetings are held in Riverside. They have occasionally a luncheon and as far as I know, they haven't done it in quite some time. But typically once or twice a year here in the Coachella Valley. In the 4 years I was on the Mission Springs Board, I only attended one of their meetings in Riverside, but I found it to be very worthwhile in terms of the people that attend those meetings. And I'm not sure, I think Assemblyman Nastandi took over this agency. That may have changed since about a year ago when I was briefed on this. So my recommendation is that we allow for the Riverside meetings as well and not limit it to the very infrequent. As far as I know, they haven't had a luncheon out here, as far as I know, in over a year, maybe 3 years. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just add that monthly meeting. I think if any one of you decide to go, and I believe me, I doubt I'll go very often, but it's worthy of the trip if you have the time.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from directors? I do have a question then about the Building Industry Association of Southern California. Are there regional chapters of that association in the sense of like countywide, for example, so that if we said something like Riverside County, that would include the Coachella Valley as well as Riverside? I'm not sure how they work.
President Ortega, the chapter is for the entire Southern California region. However, I think you could very appropriately change the words Coachella Valley to Riverside County in item 3B, and that would accomplish what you're looking to achieve.
Okay, thank you. All right, unless there's any other discussion, I'll look for a motion.
I move the list as it's presented with the exception of adding all events of the Building Industry Association held in Riverside County.
Okay, I'll look for a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. I have a first from Director Gracia, a second from Director Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Yes.
Director Bloomer,
Yes.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Yes.
Vice President Bowman,
Yes?
and President Ortega.
Aye. Thank you.
Passes.
Thank you. Right, so we can now move to item 6D, request authorization for grass removal program budget augmentation. Thank you, Mrs. Metzger.
Thank you, President Ortega and members of the board. I am very pleased to be here asking for more funding for this program. This is the second mid-year budget augmentation request. The budget started out at $1.65 million in October of 2022. staff came to the board and asked for an additional $2 million due to the high demand. And at the time, the board elected to approve that augmentation. So the current budget for the program is $3.65 million. And we are currently requesting an additional $1 million augmentation. There is a lot of demand for the program. Despite the recent rainy and snowy weather, we're still getting applicants in at a good clip due to a number of factors. In July of 2022, Desert Water Agency increased its rebate from $2 per square foot to $3 per square foot. And in October and in February, the city of Palm Springs contributed in total $550,000 in matching funds toward the program. Those two things, in addition to the regular news coverage on drought, have really led to a very banner year for this program. It is important to realize that this program is not always so popular. It really does ebb and flow. It's also worth noting that we have received two pretty significant grant allocations since the time of the last augmentation. So there was a $1.6 million grant allocation from the Department of Water Resources for the Urban Communities Drought Relief Grant to Desert Water Agency, and we are looking forward to being able to use those funds. We also recently received a $100,000 small-scale water efficiency program grant from the United States Bureau of Reclamation. So we did want to note that despite the fact that we are asking for more money and more money is going out, there is also money coming in. Additionally, it's worth noting that we see this program as a funding water supply, similar to investments that we may make in Sites Reservoir or DCP. Spending the money at the local level allows us to kind of buy sustainability for future generations here in the Coachella Valley. So we are putting money into this program with the understanding that we're very roughly saving about 55.8 gallons per square foot removed per year. And as we've talked about lots of times, we have a study that we'll be doing to kind of shore up that amount. But we do believe that we are getting quite a deal on the money that we invest in this program. The savings figure you'll see on the next page there is roughly $585 per acre foot if you look at a 30-year life of the grass removal program. So that information's just to put that into context for you when comparing to other water supply sources. And with that, we are requesting that the board authorize a budget augmentation of $1 million from agency reserves to fund the grass removal program.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Director Gracia?
So when this begins to wane in popularity, I heard you mention a number that in terms of our system losses, I guess due to our water mains and so forth. I wondered if at some point we'll be able to start putting more money into new pipelines. When we shift the money away from this program, maybe we could shift it over there and try to take care of our own house, during that time. About how much new pipe would you say we put in the last 24 months? Does anybody know?
Well, for the past year and a half, we haven't put in a lot due to design purposes. Okay. However, prior to that, I think the last job we put in about 15,000 feet of pipe, and then before that, maybe about 10,000 feet.
Right.
And we've increased our budget for replacement pipelines from around $3.5 million to about $8 million here.
So I would move the staff recommendation, but, oh, go ahead.
You tend to cut off the discussion a little bit there.
All right. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Well, I'm a huge fan of this project. When you say the grants are offsetting some of what we're spending, can you give us a ballpark of what's happening there?
Certainly. We recently learned that the Department of Water Resources will not fund artificial turf with their program. So the 1.6 million that we received from that program will not be able to offset those costs. However, we do have other funding sources, the Sentinel power plant mitigation funding, for example, that do allow us to cover those artificial turf costs. There are also other rounds of state grant funding and federal funding that do allow us to cover those artificial turf costs. So all of the funding we get from the state will be used. It's just a matter of which projects it will be applied to. And our philosophy with grants has always been to apply the funding as far back in time as is possible, with the idea that we're kind of always out on the prowl for additional funding.
Well, should we change the guidelines to say that we don't approve artificial turf in this program?
We could do that. However, the funding for the 1.6 million that we just received is eligible to be backdated to June of 2022. So we are able to fund projects so far back in time. However, the way we do post-inspections for grass removal projects, we do measure the artificial turf separately. So for example, if there's a home that converted 3,000 square feet and 1,000 was artificial turf, which is very common for folks to do a mixture of desert and artificial, we would be able to get the state reimbursement for the 2,000 that was desert landscaping, and then the remaining 1,000 that was artificial turf, we could use another funding source to augment that.
All right. But I still didn't get a balance between what we're funding and what's coming back from grants. Is
Yes.
it 10% or 90%?
So in looking at what we have spent in the program to date and the grant sources that we have in hand, we are nearly fully funded by grant, and that's since 2014. However, there have been times where we have had to outlay our own resources within the budget, and it is a little bit hard to say because we do anticipate some of these projects, even though we're augmenting the budget to $4.6 million with board approval, some of that funding is anticipated to roll over into the next fiscal year. But we can't continue to approve projects if we don't have the funding. So we'll be in a position where we'll be going after additional grants. We already have some grant funding kind of queued up to continue to apply for, to continue this program into the future. But as of to date, we are, in terms of funding that's actually been outlaid and checks that have been cut versus funds that we have grants either in hand for, have received, or have pending, we're looking at about even.
Wow. Well, that's terrific. Well, that gets my support for this proposal and the next one and the one after that. So, yeah, go with it.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? No? I do have one question, I guess, for Mrs. Metzger, and then I'll come back to you, Director Gracia. When you're asking for the augmentation to come from agency reserves, when these grants come in, where does that funding go? Does it go back into the reserves? How does that work? Or maybe that's actually more a Director Sines question.
So yes, well, the funding does come from the reserves up front, and then it is the grant is a reimbursement of the expenses, and so then at the end of the year, budgetarily, what we do is then we redesignate those funds to the reserves.
Back to the reserves?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, if it's not used elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Director Gracia?
At our conservation meeting, it came up about the city not participating in the, what is it, artificial turf portion of this? Do we make a distinction on that internally when we do is our part being derogatory toward people that do that, or how's that working?
Thank you for the question, Director Grasha. The city actually put some pretty fuzzy bumpers on us. They said that only little to no city funding shall be used for artificial turf. And in speaking with city staff about how to interpret that, we determined that 15% was appropriate. So if in mass, out of all the $550,000 they have given us, we have to ensure that 15% or less of that goes to artificial turf.
So they're still allowing it?
They are allowing it, but only up to that 15% of the funding they've given us. However, what I will say is that Desert Water Agency used to prohibit artificial turf. When I came to the agency as a staff member back in 2015, that was the policy that we had on the books, but we shifted gears because there was a large demand for folks to incorporate some artificial turf into their designs. So
Well, I would think that the resort industry would insist on being able to have that latitude. That's why I question that. You know, they want to be able to have green grass or for the dogs to whatever. But the mayor, when we were at the Urban Water Conference, I don't know if you guys were there when she spoke, but she greeted us at the opening and talked about how the city doesn't allow artificial turf as part of their, and I was like, you know, I think it's a little too restrictive, and if I don't see it as a big issue. I'm glad that they've loosened up a little bit and are now not being so negative to people that find that an important element. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? No? All right. I'll look for a motion.
So move.
All right. Second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. I have a first from Director Grasha and a second from Director Bloomer. Roll call vote, please.
Director Grasha,
Yes.
Director Bloomer,
Yes.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Yes.
Vice President Bowman,
Yes.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, so action item 6E, request approval of 2023 legislative and regulatory policy platform. Mrs. Metzger.
thank you. This is the first of Desert Water Agency's legislative and regulatory policy platforms in our recent history. We felt it was important to put together a document that really supported staff, consultants, lobbyists in their efforts to gain meetings and make the best use of those meetings and respond to requests for support, respond to ever-changing and amended legislation. So what the objective of this document is to really outline the agency's very high-level direction from the board to staff and consultants and agents to help effectively lobby both in Sacramento and in DC, and even at the local level, sharing what our priorities are. This document also aims to get consistency. So ensuring that although there is an ad hoc legislative committee, that the full board has an opportunity to weigh in on the principles and priorities for the agency's legislative and regulatory work. So this document outlines not only the goals, but also what different positions the agency tends to take on bills, what those positions mean, what different roles and responsibilities all of the agents have in working for Desert Water Agency, and also the directives themselves. And I think it's worth spending a few moments to dive into each of the directives if Mr. President would indulge me in spending some time there.
He would.
So we'll start with Policy Directive 1. And I will note that the ad hoc legislative committee did review these directives and helped us refine them. We did really appreciate the guidance and put getting where we are today with these. So the first directive is to maintain local control of water resources and avoid constraints on operations. So that was a very foundational point. And what our hope is, and I think this is a pretty good representative of the rest of the directives, is that we can use each of these as somewhat of an umbrella. So if we have a bill that comes to us later in the legislative session after the formal bill positions are adopted, and let's say there's an amendment to a bill that may change our position, this directive would give our lobbyist and our general manager kind of a higher level of certainty of what the board may feel toward a certain change and how to respond to that change. So, and we did try to prioritize these. So when you see Directive 1, maintaining local control of water resources and avoiding constraints on operations, that's very important to what we do. And, certainly we cannot get by if we are constantly hit with, bills, regulations that impede our ability to control our water supply. So that is directive number 1. Directive number 2 is to protect DWA's local and imported water supplies. Again, absolutely paramount to what we do, both as a retail agency and as a water management entity. Directive 3 is to maintain or improve DWA's ability to efficiently conduct business. Now, under this directive, you may see different types of bills. The first 2 directives, you'll probably see the types of bills that we're used to getting in our packets that are, directly germane to water. When we're talking about Directive 3, there may be human resources laws or laws aimed at employer flexibility or public access. Our lobbyist gave us an example of a bill that required us to provide public restrooms to the community, and the type of operational impacts that can have on us in terms of security, letting folks access our building, et cetera. So there are every year a number of bills that kind of fall into that category that affect us as a larger part of the community, whether it's bills that affect all public agencies or bills that affect employers, bills that affect public spaces. So that's what you'll see under Directive 3. Policy Directive 4, keep water and tax rates affordable, seek external funding for conservation, new projects, and/or facility improvements. We thought it was very important to have clear direction from the board that this is an objective that we should be pursuing. And the reason it's important in the legislative and regulatory framework is there are often opportunities for funding, whether it be through the budget process or through the bond process. So we wanted to keep that very clear. And then closely related is Policy Directive 5, opposing a water tax or fee and monitoring ways in which the state will address water affordability. Many of you are familiar with the water tax that has kind of come before water agencies in California again and again and again, and to Aqua's credit, been successfully abated. But we did want to get a clear direction that if a water tax is to kind of revive, that the board has kind of directed and empowered staff to oppose that. And if we're going to move on to Directive 6 and 7 are Directive 6 is specific to the state. Engage with the Department of Water Resources and State Water Resources Control Board to ensure urban water use efficiency legislation is implemented in a way that accounts for local circumstances. Now, this is a very important year for this legislation. As many of you probably recall, back in 2018, there was some pretty sweeping legislation on water use efficiency, and it's taken through this year to get these the framework that was put into place fully implemented, and it's still not yet fully implemented. They're in the rulemaking, they will be in the final rulemaking phase this calendar year. So it's really important for us to keep an eye and a pulse on how these things are moving along and account for things like seasonal population and our extreme hot temperatures to make sure that whatever factors do go into the final regulations account for our circumstances here in the Coachella Valley. I think that's been one principle that has kind of been ever present with our work, with especially with the State Water Resources Control Board, is they've oftentimes looked for a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, and that has never really suited the Coachella Valley very well because we find ourselves kind of on the extremes of the bell curve, if you will. And then the last directive we have, Directive 7, is a federal directive, and that's support federal legislation to exempt conservation rebates issued by water districts from tax burdens. This has already been accomplished at the state level. However, at the federal level, it is not. So what this means is for the incentives that we issue over $600, we have to issue a 1099 to our customers for their receipt of the funding, and that is taxable income. So it actually reduces the effectiveness of the incentive in addition to being a large administrative burden. And it kind of sours the experience for folks. You know, if the last thing they get from us after investing much of their own funding to help us save water is a note saying that they have to report this on their taxes, it doesn't end things as favorably as it could or should. And that said, energy incentives are already exempt. So we're really just looking for this to be equitable with that. And our federal lobbyist has assured us that this could be the year. This is something we've been after for a number of years. And Director Bloomer can attest to that, as she's served on the legislative committee a number of years ago when this was a hot issue, and we felt confident it might make some progress, but it didn't. I think the caveat this year is that they're looking at making it more of a bipartisan effort. So we're hopeful that we can see some impact there. And we also hope that these directives are helpful to directors when doing business in DC or in Sacramento. It really should help us prioritize what we are speaking with regulators and legislators about. And with that, welcome any discussion by the board on the directives themselves, on the packet that contains them, and then ultimately we recommend approval of this packet. And kind of the next step, the way you'll see this come to life, is our state lobbyist, Bob Reeb, will be at the meeting on March 21st with a packet of recommended positions. And what he's going to do is he's going to go through each bill with a lens for whatever directives are adopted and ensure that our positions on those bills align with these directives. So hopefully this is a really useful living document, not something that sits and collects dust.
Thank you. So, Secretary Treasurer McKenna, you wanted to make some comments or had some questions?
Yes, I might be scooping Director Bloomer on this, but we met with the Chief of Staff at Senator Dianne Feinstein's office, and he said that bill was coming back in this year. So I think we didn't meet with any legislature and failed to mention this, that how strange it was that they're getting taxed on a water conservation measure, but they get a tax credit if they do an energy conservation measure. I think everybody heard us. So on that one, I think we look forward to some good news. I was a little on policy directive number 6, if I can go on.
Of course you can.
You know, when you install something in your computer, it says accept always, decline always, or ask every time. When I looked at number 6, I thought this is an ask every time kind of issue, because you can't adopt a policy that there's never an additional burden to, a water agency. There may be, but it may be worth it sometimes. So I would be inclined to ask if more detail, case by case, that one could come back to the board, at least informally, or to the committee, that executive committee perhaps. And on number 5, which is opposing a tax or fee, well, yeah, I'm opposed to taxes and fees, who isn't? But I'm also still troubled by the lack of any kind of lifeline service for water. You know, the state declared water a human right, but did nothing about implementing it. And, well, they did something, but they didn't provide any money to implement it. And it just bothers me that 1 million Californians don't have safe drinkable water in their home. And not far from here, they're not customers of ours, but in the Oasis Mobile Home Park, their water has arsenic in it. And it's just shocking. And when I raised that question with the head of the Metropolitan Water District at one of these conferences, he dodged it completely. You know, and there's a huge agency with resources far beyond ours. And they do have people in their district, in their coverage area that can't drink the water, and they do nothing about it. And it's just not right. You know, I mean, it just gets me on a gut level as not being right. And if it came in with, you know, $1 a month fee, I'd pay it. Even if it was voluntary, you know, we need to find a mechanism for getting drinkable water to the rest of our citizens of this state. And we need to find a way to make it affordable for people that are really struggling. You know, my water bill is my biggest utility bill. In fact, it's bigger now than all of the others added together. And we can't turn a blind eye to the fact that this is causing hardship with some people, a lot of people, and we turn their water off. And I'm in favor of turning it off. We have to live too. We have to pay our bills here, but a blanket, opposition to any kind of fee or addition to our customers' charges, I think that needs to be thought about. I'm off my soapbox now. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
Just in response to Director McKenna's about the tax and fee, and I think we look at every bill or legislative item and make a decision. It's not, just up to the lobbyists to oppose everything that has to do with the tax or fee. The ones that have come before us before, we're going to impose like an extreme administration burden on us, like hiring more staff to be able to pull that money out, to send it back up to Sacramento. And the benefit, our customers were paying for a benefit outside of our service area, is what kind of our argument is. Why should our customers pay for a benefit up in a remote part of Northern California?
Well, we're all in it together, aren't we?
Well, this was also when the state had an enormous surplus, and they chose not to go in and provide water, fair drinking water. So the state has resources and other funds to do this, rather than taking from other customers to support people in other areas, is my opinion.
Thank you. Director Gracia?
We have a committee, right? Is that what you're on?
We have an ad hoc legislative committee. That's correct.
Do you guys meet often enough to keep up with every single thing, or is it just infrequent and as-needed basis? It seemed to me that committees, and I guess you do, based on what you just said, should be keeping an eye on this stuff. And, I don't have a problem supporting the overall stuff you have here, but it seems like that committee should be able to meet regularly and stay up with every little thing that comes up. And we have a consultant that I haven't heard give a presentation during, at least while I've been on the board, who on legislative items. Is his legislative? Well, he's a legislative consultant. What's his title?
Are you referring to one of our lobbyists?
Yeah. My point was that it seems like that, he used to give a regular presentation to the previous board. I wondered if that's something we did away with.
He's going to be at the next board.
He's going to be
That's
here
coming
next,
up.
yeah.
And I'm
That's
looking
Bob
forward
Reed.
to that, because he's an extraordinary guy, and
Yeah, he will see us in 2 weeks.
Okay,
And
great.
do exactly that. Yep. Vice President Bowman?
Yes, thank you. I'm sensitive to Director McKenna on the blanket of things such as the Director of Policy 5. But I think it's because we're new and we haven't seen in action what our staff has done in the past. Would it help you if we would, like on Policy Directive 5, generally oppose a water tax? In other words, the concept being that it's not a blanket always, but it's generally. Would it ease your heartburn a little bit? I know it would mine, but I'm also trusting staff to bring before us the real critical things.
Well, having heard that we're going to address this topic in 2 weeks, I think that helps a lot. Because the information I'm going on is from a board meeting perhaps last October, November, when that lobbyist did make a presentation, and he said some things that, I was standing up in my chair saying, wait a minute, this is exactly the opposite of what I'm hearing from constituents, and I'm out there knocking on doors. Is that we had a lobbyist who was saying this, and we had constituents who were saying that, and we need to get these better aligned. So we're going to have a good discussion, I think, in 2 weeks.
Good.
And if I can follow up on that, if I understood what you said, Mrs. Metzger, these are guidelines. The actual review of those bills, for example, will be happening in 2 weeks. But this is something that would go to both our lobbyists at state and federal, and they would use this to help look at those bills and then come to us and say, hey, this is how we think it's going to impact you. This is how it aligns or doesn't align with your policy directives. But at the end of the day, this board still takes a position on those bills.
Yes, President Ortega, that is true. However, the board takes positions on bills once a year, and those bills are frequently amended. And there are spot bills, which are basically gut and amends. And so what this policy directive does is it gives the agents and the staff a good opportunity to come up with their best guess, which can later be confirmed by the legislative committee and the board. If you look at the roles and responsibilities page, and we may want to scroll up a bit to that, it does note that it is in the purview of the board of directors to take official positions on legislative and regulatory matters. So, and this directive, what it does is it outlines the responsibility of the GM to make calls. There are frequently times, especially later in the legislative session, when bills are getting, kind of wheeled and dealed and last-minute nitty-gritty amendments to sign on to support or oppose or change a position that the board may have taken. And then he would notify the board soon after doing so that if there was an issue, it could come before the full board. But it is really a really important guiding document now when we're looking at taking those annual positions, but also to be used throughout the legislative session to keep us nimble.
Okay. And as Director Grasha noted, we do have a legislative committee. It is an ad hoc committee. It meets when it needs to meet, so it doesn't have a regular schedule. And that would be an opportunity too, if there were something that were incredibly important or seemed to be very important, we could do that. I do have one request prior to our meeting with Mr. Reeb. Usually what he provides is a ton of information, and it's really hard to get through. So I would appreciate perhaps having that document, if it were possible, prior to the posting of the agenda and the creation of the board packet, to give us all a little bit more time to go through. Because I know I would appreciate that myself, and I think perhaps a few other people might as well.
We can accommodate that. We actually anticipate receiving the first draft of that document next week, kind of midweek.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other discussion? No. Okay.
Move the recommended action.
All right, I'll look for a second.
Second?
Okay. I have a first from Director Grasha, a second from Vice President Bowman. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Director Grasha,
Yes.
Director Bloomer,
Yes.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Yes.
Vice President Bowman,
Yes.
and President Ortega.
Aye, thank you.
Motion passes.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Ashley leaned over and asked me a question whether I had a concern about your suggestion that that be provided in advance of the agenda packet. I said, no, I don't. One thing that does occur to me is that as soon as that document goes to all the members of the board, it then becomes a public document, but it just would become public sooner than the rest of the agenda.
Right.
So unless you are concerned about that, I'm not.
I don't think so, no. Right, okay. Discussion items 7A. So this will begin with the director's report on attendance at the Urban Water Institute Conference here in Palm Springs. There were 4 of us in attendance during those 3 days. So I don't know that we need to report entirely on everything that happened because there'll be a lot of duplication, but perhaps each of the directors could pick a couple of the sessions that resonated with them or that they'd like to highlight. And we'll start with Director Bloomer.
Okay, I think the highlight was Bill Hazenkamp from Metropolitan Water District was there and kind of gave an overview on what's happening on the Colorado. His version of the exact truth of what happened with the 6 basin states agreeing on something and California not even being in the room about it. And he was just clarifying from the California perspective or the metropolitan perspective on how that all happened versus what was actually in the news. So that was very interesting. So they're working hard to get an agreement with all 7 states and Mexico. And that was kind of the theme, was what's happening on the Colorado, and then the other main theme was a huge focus on new sources of water, like recycled potable reuse. So that was, it's very expensive, and trying to come up with the regulations on how it would all work. But there's a lot of areas working on that, and it was very interesting. LA County is doing a lot of cool new projects with stormwater, so that was interesting considering we just had that huge storm. So those were kind of the highlights for me, and so I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Director Gracia?
You know, I think it was the third one of the event that I've been at, put on by this group, and I've got to say, it's wonderful that they come to Palm Springs. It's always enlightening. I learn something at every one I've attended, and one of the things that popped out, you know, throughout that was a lot of talk. I found it interesting, especially when one of our neighboring directors walked out during the discussion on neighboring agencies, learning how to get along and work together on things that benefit our mutual constituents. And that was also something that carried throughout the theme of the next one that I'll be reporting on with the Leadership Academy put on by the Association of Special Districts. And so I'm looking forward to finding a way for our agency, our board, to develop a working relationship with those boards that, you know, work in our, in basically within our boundaries. And so I'll bring that up maybe at director's comments at the end of the meeting. But the Urban Water Conference is always, in my view, probably the best conference that we attend. You know, Aqua, they do it twice a year. It seems a little more, their conferences seem a little more stressed, you know, like there's too much trying to be packed in compared to this one. It's a much more relaxed, you're not moving from room to room. It's, you know, you are where you are, and they kind of bring the show to you, and you just kind of absorb it. And if you're there for the whole couple of days, you'll learn, and you can't help but learn. Where Aqua's is a little different, and so with that, I think, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Yes, I went into the Urban Water Institute hot foot from the irrigation leader conference in Arizona, so I got a view of the, the rural needs of water districts and then the urban needs. But I saw a constant theme, and that was for diversity and safety of supply. Everybody had a need to diversify their supply. We saw an agency, Santa Clarita, I think, that lost wells, a dozen wells in the space of a month because of PFAS, and PFAS. And I've watched that. Mine had been painted twice in the time I've lived here with fire retardant. It's going to end up in our aquifer. It's not a great thing. So it made me think hard about diversity of supply. Now, sitting where we are, not a lot of opportunity for diversity of supply. But thinking further ahead, things that we think are unviable, impossible, maybe we just need a bigger view. And I'm particularly thinking hard about that East Branch extension of the State Water Project. And the San Gorgonio Pass Agency, which is smaller than us, somehow found them $400 million to connect up to that. And I think it's been the doctrine of this agency, as I read the board minutes, that's not a viable solution for us. And maybe it's time we thought about that again. Let's put the wide panoramic view on. We've got to find some diversity in case, we start losing wells to contamination, or the aquifer gets an East Palestine type disaster on top of it, or something else. So everything I read now about, Snow Creek, Whitewater, all of this is suddenly, I have a different perspective. These are all, and reclamation too, these are all water supply sources that we should pull in and get connected to our system. And yeah, it's probably a big investment program, but let's think big, because this valley's not going to get any smaller in the next 30 years. And it takes 30 years to build anything in California now, other than a football stadium, which you can do it too. So that was what I took from Urban Water. It was a very, very great experience for me to just meet with the other districts in the room. So.
Great, thank you. Well, I think the theme that I, besides those that have already been mentioned, the one that I seemed to resonate with me that I heard over and over again was the public's confidence in what they're being told about water. And there seemed to be some concerns within with certain speakers, as well as folks that asked questions about this growing, perhaps, lack of confidence. I don't know that to be necessarily true for this agency. Perhaps that's more the experience for other agencies. Perhaps that's more just sort of the general what we've been seeing in the last few years in politics in terms of lack of confidence in government and such, and we are in fact a governmental agency. But that was that communication, particularly when talking about communication, there was a panel of folks that were that are in the communication departments of two very large agencies, and there was discussion about it's not just outreach, it's engagement. And like, how do we engage the public? Not just pushing messages out there, but engaging them in helping formulate those messages. And I feel like, and this is not a criticism of what's happened here in the past, but perhaps that's something that we need to do a better job of. I know that there's been discussion about surveys and that sort of thing, but I do seem to recall, perhaps with the last board, that there was also a conversation about involvement of some sort of, how do we want to call it, public panel, members of the public who are interested in things that have to do with water, and we definitely have people in our community that are interested in water, and we have this Water Counts Academy, which I think is a good place perhaps to start to recruit if we were looking to do that. That's something that I would be interested in finding out more about, how we could do that in a way that perhaps doesn't invoke certain things like the Brown Act, et cetera. But yeah, that's what I took away, was this communication and an apparent lack of confidence, or growing lack of confidence, in perhaps messages about water supply, water quality, and rates as well. So with that, I think we can move on to Director Gracia about his experience with CSDA.
Well, thank you. As you know, the CSDA is a statewide organization that held an event here in Indian Wells that was several days long. Unfortunately, midway through the opportunity, I came down with an extraordinary cold and couldn't able to complete the training. But those meetings that I did attend were very well worth the time and effort. I've got a nearly 3-inch thick book that I'm continuing to study and looking forward to implementing some of the things that are in that book and that I learned during that conference for which I was able to attend.
Can I ask, what was the training actually for?
A leadership academy for the how to be a more productive board member, how to interact with staff, the way and presented from a staff perspective, which was interesting because as a board member and someone that's been involved in politics, I found that was very inadequate in that aspect of it. Learning how, for instance, not to campaign outside of your own division during election time, and how that can be, it'd be like grabbing the third rail of life. When a director does it, it can be very disrupting to an organization, and something that I think they should have maybe spent a little time on, and maybe something we can look at here at this agency.
Thank you. And so where are we now? We are with Directors Bloomer and Secretary Treasurer McKenna regarding Aqua in DC. Would you like to start, Kristen?
Sure. So I think we had a very productive time in Washington, D.C. The first day, we had some Hill visits, 4 of them, with Water Strategies and Chris Pauley. We met with staff from Senator Padilla's office, Representative Calvert, the House Appropriations Committee, with the majority staffer and minority staffer. And the minority staffer wanted to give compliments to our website. She found it very helpful and useful that she read before our meeting, and she knew all about us. So I said that I would pass that along to Ashley. And we met with Senator Feinstein's office as well, where her water policy advisor, John Watts, assured us that they would be reintroducing the Tax Parity Act. They're just looking for hopefully a companion bill in the House and making it more bipartisan. So they're just trying to find the right time to do that. And then we just want to make sure that I get all the names right. We had with the Aqua group from Aqua, we kind of had I don't know what you would call it. We were all in a room and all the people came through, which was, it was actually the senators and representatives themselves, Padilla, Calvert, Huffman, Costa, John Watts from Senator Feinstein's office, and then we had some people from the Natural Resources Committee, from the House and the Senate, and the other 2 people didn't make it. But it was very informative, and everyone kind of stayed on the same theme. It was all about water supply and building water infrastructure and storage, and kind of the main focus, especially for the Central Valley Project, is to get that extra, what is it going to be, 12 feet or 18 feet built on top of Shasta. That's really their big push right now, which apparently it'll still be shorter than what the project was originally approved for. So that was kind of the main themes from that. But and all the representatives and senators kind of seem to be on the same page, is what the ones from California. So, and some Republican and some Democrat. So we have a good delegation back there working hard for us and getting funding. They also did mention, the Appropriations Committee mentioned if we need any help with anything that we have, Water Smart grants or anything pending with BOR, that they would definitely be helpful if anything's getting stalled.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Well, it was a great experience for me walking the corridors of power, and I know why they call them that because there's a lot of corridors. But we had a tremendous reception in our one-on-one meetings with representatives and staff of our legislative team. Then we had a very interesting meeting where they came to talk to us. We sat in a room and they arrived one after the other. Senator Padilla, Senator Feinstein's chief of staff, the representatives. I was kind of surprised by how on point they were with water. It wasn't like you had to explain to them what the main issues were in water supply in California. They were on it. Republican and Democrat alike basically said the same thing to us. So that was revealing for me. I thought we'd be educating them, but they partly because I think they all have a staff member assigned to water, and they're reading notes that staff member wrote. Because I without mentioning names, we have a representative locally who's an election denier, and I wasn't expecting much sense from him, but he made a lot of sense on water topics. That was a surprise to me. Over and over again, they were telling us there's money available. You know, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. I mean, they're talking many billions of dollars. I think a trillion with a T was mentioned once in terms of how much public money from the federal side is sitting, to be assigned to projects. And I certainly took note of that, think big was what they were telling us, because we've got money and you won't see it again in another 10 years from now. So do it now. No one has a shovel-ready project for $1 billion or more because it just takes too long. But that was a consistent theme from all of these legislators. There's money now. Get it out there. And we're telling that the administration from the White House is saying, get that money out there because we want to see results before the people vote again. And I don't know what we can do, but let's put our thinking caps on about, where do we need money? Water reclamation is a big one. A lot of money available for that. And, we need to find a way to tap into it, to get our projects done, get that source of supply online. So a great experience for me. And I appreciate you sent me. So thank you.
We're glad that you went. Thank you. All right, so we can now move to action item 8, which is the Secretary Treasurer's report for January 2023.
Could I ask the finance director to do that for me? Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer McKenna. In January 2023, in the operating fund, the agency received $2,783,312 in water sales revenue receipts. The agency received $24,842 in reclamation sales revenue receipts and $3,188 in power sales revenue from the Southern California Edison for Snow Creek Hydroelectric Station. The agency paid $3,130,758 in accounts payable in the operating fund in January 2023. Year-to-date, water sales revenues are 4% under budget. Again, this continues our trend because of conservation measures. Year-to-date total revenues are 4% under budget. Year-to-date total expenses are 6% under budget. The active services for January 31st, 2023 was 23,432 active services as compared to December 31st, 2022 of 23,454 active services. This is a net decrease of 22 active services. Again, this measures active services and not services that are currently in the ground, just ones that are currently being billed within the month. Moving on to the general fund, the agency received $16,137,881 in property taxes. The agency received in replenishment assessments from the DWA operating fund in the amount of $955,683. The general fund paid $3,596,460 in state water project charges in the month of January 2023, bringing the year-to-date state water project payments in the fiscal year to $13,990,555. Moving on to the wastewater fund, the agency received $68,084 in wastewater revenue receipts for sewer service and paid out $80,468 in accounts payable. And that concludes the financial highlights for January 2023. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? No? Thank you. And we can move on to item number 9, General Manager's Report. Mr. Kraus.
Mr. President, members of the board. First item is the boardroom and board conference room audio-visual upgrades, which we're all enjoying today. We added our large screen for the public and for staff if needed, and we modified your dais, which used to not have that little black partition on it, and your monitors. We have all new tables for staff and seating, and moved some things around in here that hadn't been moved for probably decades. So if you have any ideas about anything else you'd like to add to the room, I'd be happy to hear that too. We have, behind you, there's a big blank space, so I don't know if there's something could go there that you might like. We've also upgraded our board conference room, which now has a large monitor in it as well, and has the ability to conduct hybrid meetings or virtual meetings from there. In fact, today I think we'll have somebody remoting in, a consultant. So it's very functional for hybrid and virtual, and we're really happy with the outcome. We're still working out some of the issues, but I think so far today it's worked pretty well. The whole project was done by Waves, and it was, I think we contracted with them almost a year ago, so we've been waiting a long time for equipment. It's taken a year to get the equipment, and then probably about a month to install it. And this boardroom project was $130,000 approximately, and our board conference room was a $19,000 project. The next item is the Department of Water Resources announced on February 22nd a modest increase in our allocation. It went from 30 to 35%. What that means to the agency is about 2,800 extra acre feet this year. And for DWA and CVWD, it's on the order of about 9,700 acre feet. The whole project received a net increase of 210,000 acre feet. And from what I'm told, there's a good chance that the allocation will go to 50% by the end of the year. So we're getting these storms, and if they keep coming in and we don't have a real hot spell where the snow melts off really fast, we're probably going to hit something around 50%. So, and that'll be in April. They'll be making that last call in that month. Next item we have is a landscapers workshop on grass removal program. So DWA has scheduled a landscaper workshop for Thursday, March 23rd from 11 to noon in the boardroom. The hour of lunch and, what is that? I'm sorry. We will be providing information to landscape contractors on changes to the grass removal incentive program for low-income customers. Changes include allowing incentive checks to go directly to the landscape contractor on an expedited check release process. And the City of Palm Springs official Office of Sustainability will also briefly present on their mulch giveaway program. Next item, we will also be starting or resuming our tours. DWA has scheduled public tours of the operations facilities for Thursday, March 30th. The morning tour will begin at 8 a.m. and the afternoon tour at 1 p.m. The 3-hour tour will include visits to our well site 39, Palisades Reservoir, the reclamation facility and laboratory there, and the solar panel field. We're looking to get about 50 participants and the promotion went out to about 350 customers. The next item is our system leak data. It looks like our system leaks are kind of up where they have been in the past. They were low last time we met. We have 32 leaks in a 2-week period. Several of the pipelines are in the replacement pipeline projects, the Avenida Caballeros being the largest diameter, 14-inch, is in the 2020-2021 replacement program. And then we have Andreas Road, Luring Drive, and Terry Lane in the 2021 and 2022 replacement pipeline project. And lastly, my activities and meetings. We had some coordination meetings with CVWD and MWD in connection with our exchange agreements. I also attended an Agua Caliente Water Authority board meeting. I attended a state water contractor water supply investment program coordination meeting, DWA Sites Reservoir Finance meeting. We had several meetings in the boardroom getting ready for this meeting to prepare for it. I had a Lake Paris seepage recovery meeting for that project, legislative check-in with our state and federal lobbyists, a Class 8 agenda development meeting for the state water contractors. Also, there's a sites workshop framework for selling and leasing land for that project. Steve Johnson attended that for me. And then I attended the Sites Reservoir closed session. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board members for our general manager?
The tour, that's open to board members as well as the public. And are we going to get a notice of that, or how do we sign up? I mean,
You'll get a notice, and you're all invited. We just need to be careful about getting 5 members on the, the morning tour. If we could split it up, that would be great. And then, you're all aware of the
I think
Brown
that
Act issue.
tour I've been on, but you have 2, and I missed the other one, or somehow I didn't get some, anyway.
Mr. Candidate one, but the public tour, I've been on that a couple of years ago as a civilian, and I thought,
Yeah.
I was pretty impressed. I took my sister and her husband, and they were just like,
So
in
I'm
awe of
looking forward to
what it
that,
takes.
yeah.
We'll make sure you know about it.
Anything else? All right, so we can move to action item 10, item 10, director's comments and requests, and I'll start with Director Gracia.
Yeah, during my comments on one of the items, I mentioned that, I get to talk to directors from other agencies that we have relations with in one way or another, and the one thing that I hear during every discussion is we need to find a way to have a better relationship between at least the directors. I know you guys on staff get along great and do all, and somehow there's this disconnect with the board members that lead to interesting courtroom displays of discontent, I guess. And I'm looking forward to this agency developing a way for us to interact in a way that allows other directors at other agencies to not be misled, even by their own staff. I know that when I was on the Mission Springs board, there was if you didn't go along with staff's belief that there's an antagonistic relationship with this agency, then you weren't in the club. And I've been working hard to change that on the Mission Springs board. I think we've had 3 new directors elected or appointed in the last few months. Hopefully things will get better and we won't have to continue down that road. And I'm looking for a way to kind of institutionalize a better relationship. I don't know if that's, meetings between the boards or what, but we have an opportunity now with you, Director McKenna, serving as a liaison as Mission Springs has had with us, to begin a new relationship. And I'm hoping that will begin to, maybe you can work on with the directors over there on developing some kind of a way for us to fix that mess that was allowed to build up over decades. And maybe we'll have a new day going forward. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
I don't have anything.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Yeah, well, I hear what you say. It's not done overnight, though. I think I'm working on developing better relationships with both the City of Desert Hot Springs and Mission Springs Water District, and I'm happy to have been assigned some work on that. I was actually at a City Council meeting 2 weeks ago at Desert Hot Springs, just on a whim, but it was very helpful. I met the Executive Director of Desert X, and that's getting to be a huge event. So I'm going to reach out to her and see if we can participate somehow and get our name on that program next time, 2 years from now. Mission Springs, tough nut to crack, but yeah, there's been a lot of disinformation provided to their board, I think, in the past, and it's not been easy to overcome it because it's very deeply ingrained. But Rome wasn't built in a day, so I'm going to work on that. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Vice President Bowman?
Yes, I want to say thanks and congratulations to staff for doing this room, making it warm, inviting, comfortable, and I know it was a lot of work for everybody to pull it off, and I think you did a fantastic job. I also want to congratulate staff on having the first hybrid meeting. It was kind of cool, as right now I'm looking on my screen and I see us and I see we still have one outside of the room signed in. It's good to see what's going on with the public in that way. And that's not an easy thing to pull off. And I know that as we archive these up onto YouTube, it will be beneficial for everybody. And lastly, I'd like to congratulate us for having a productive and professional meeting today. And may these things continue.
Thank you. So I'll follow up on a couple of things that were said already and then add one more item as far as my comments are concerned. With regard to the Mission Springs Water District, I think that we all understand, I'd like to think we all understand that that's, a better relationship with them is important. We have very similar goals in a lot of ways, and we certainly have, as of course we're drawing from the same source. So in following up on Director Grosh's comment, I'll actually look to General Counsel on how that relationship, or how should I phrase this, how we can go about doing that. I mean, are there certain issues that we should be aware of as we develop a relationship with them? Is there a way to do a joint meeting from time to time, if that makes sense, on a common concern or a common matter?
Sure. Joint meetings are possible. You could have a joint meeting at their place, or they could have, the Brown Act would allow them to have a joint meeting at your place or somewhere in between. It would have to be jointly noticed as a meeting by both boards. And other than that, any kind of informal discourse, discussion is fine. If it is going to be informal, I would be concerned about any group of 3 board members meeting with anyone else because of Brown Act concerns, because that would, there'd be nothing to talk about unless you were talking about agency business. And of course, if there are 3 talking about agency business, then you've got a Brown Act issue. But individual meetings or in groups of 2, that's fine. Social opportunities are great. I strongly suspect that there's a lot of commonality there that people don't think about often enough, that could be cured just through normal discussion. I would imagine that a lot of the things they're concerned about, you're also concerned about. My impression in the past has been that a lot of the concerns have been fueled by fear of what someone might do or could do, and distrust. And I think it would certainly be worthwhile to try to remedy that. I think there's a lot of because of the freeway separating one area from another area, I think that there has been kind of an artificial division that has been perceived, which is beyond reality. So I think the more people can talk, the better. I think that you know, I've certainly had a good communication with their legal counsel. We've talked about things in the past. I know that board members here have talked with their board members there. And yet, it's funny how when one group kind of gets together, it somehow becomes polarizing, you know, that one group will talk about what they think that the other group thinks, or what the other group may be planning to do that they're not hearing about, that sort of thing. So, anyway, that went beyond your question. But yeah, there are ways to do it. You could formally do it through joint meetings, comply with the Brown Act, not a problem. And then, you know, informal discussions, contacts, individual discussions, that's all of that, I think, is helpful.
Okay. I guess my one thought, concern would be any conversation that had to do with the litigation. My suspicion would be that would be something we would not want to discuss, but maybe I'm wrong.
I'd be a little bit nervous if there were a lot of in-depth discussion about that I was unaware of myself.
Of course. Right.
Of course, I'd want to control all of that, which I can't do.
Well, just as as Secretary Treasurer McKenna knows, when we were at the conference here a few weeks ago, as is typically my observation has been while attending conferences that the Mission Springs Water District attendees tend to stick together. They tend to sit together, and they tend to eat lunch together. They tend to participate together. So I took an opportunity to go and introduce myself to them. I had met one of the board members before last year at the Rotary Club event that we attended, that Mark and Ashley and I attended in Desert Hot Springs. And I found that I know that that's coming up again, and that's one of our events that we sponsor and also allow board members to attend. And I would encourage us to attend that event in the spirit of perhaps having a better relationship, not only with the city of Desert Hot Springs, but also with the Mission Springs Water District. And the response I got when I went to the table and introduced myself was, thank you for coming over. We have a lot of work to do together. So I took that as a positive. And that was a very short conversation. As it relates to the boardroom, again, I want to give my thanks to the staff who've been working so hard on putting this together, and for the conference room, and for sticking with us the last 3 years in terms of dealing with lots of turns and changes as it relates to having virtual meetings, et cetera, et cetera. I, for one, am glad to not be at home and have the fear, which has happened a few times, that a cat is going to jump onto my keyboard while I'm trying to say something. So she can stay at home and I can be here, and that's a good arrangement. And with that, unless there's anything else, I'd like to close this part of the meeting, and we can adjourn to closed session. Now that we're meeting in person, I'm going to just ask for clarification. We're going to move to the conference room for the closed session, and then when we're done in closed session, we're going to come back here and close the public part of the meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes, great. All right. So thank you to members of the public who are still with us, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Can I ask, how are the microphones, are they, when we go in that other room, right now, what I'm saying is part of,
So once you guys walked out, she's gonna mute all the stuff. I just wanna ask you guys, and this is for recording purposes.
right?
Through the meeting, the only thing that I noticed is the mic is not facing where you're talking. So I still can hear you, but the Zoom can hear you, but for the recording reasons, it might be too low. So just keep that in mind when you try to talk to the mic.
The volume in the room is a little low for me.
Yeah, we can adjust that too if it is too low. So we're gonna run through that stuff, but just keep in mind that if you talk a little bit directly to the mic, it's gonna be better for the recording.
All right, welcome back to open session. And we're reconvening the meeting back into open session, and we do not have any reportable action from closed session at this time, but we have formulated we have a motion, I think, or we have formulated a motion.
In closed session, we talked about.
Oh, turn your mic on.
We talked about the general manager's contract and a performance review of sorts, I guess, and we were, I think, unanimous in our appreciation for the work that you've done. In our, only a few months on the board, but in the community for decades, I can say that never, that I can think of, was there a time when there was, a situation where the community was questioning the actions of this water agency. It's been well-run for generations, and that continues to this day, and this board appreciates that. And we will be, I'll be making a motion to, that our council will read the particulars of it, and with that, I'll move that that motion be approved by this board.
So is this the time for council to tell us what that is?
Well, let me tell you what my understanding of it is.
Right,
You
okay.
tell me if I'm wrong. The motion is to increase a merit increase in your compensation by 4.5%, plus a $2,000 annual vehicle allowance, and that's effective in this current pay period.
And that would go for the remainder of the contract, which is this 1 year, right, about? And so with that,
Okay, so I have a first, and can I have a second?
I'll make a second.
Thank you. I have a first from Director Gracia, a second from Director Bloomer, and roll call vote, please.
Director Gracia,
yes.
Director Bloomer,
Yes.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Yes.
Vice President Bowman,
Yes.
and President Ortega.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. And with that, to all the members of the public that might still be out there.
Can I
thank you
just
for-
say, I just wanted to
Yes.
say thank you to the board.
Yes.
And I really appreciate it, and it's been my pleasure
Looking
to,
forward to the next few months and seeing how that manifests.
Yes.
right, me too.
Yes, thank you very
Thank
much
you very much.
for all your dedicated service over the many years to this agency and to this current board and previous boards. And we wouldn't be here today in the shape that we're in today without that effort and that work and that really hard work. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you,
Appreciate it.
and we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.